Bikers harass Sandra Bullock at gas station unaware that Denzel Washington is watching. The hum of the highway faded as Sandra Bullock's sleek car pulled off onto the gravel of a desolate gas station, a mere speck in the stretch of empty road that snaked through the Midwestern countryside. It was a place designed for travelers to pause, quick, functional, nothing more. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pumps as a slight breeze stirred the yellowing grass by the fence. Sandra rolled down her window, breathing in the cool air as she came to a stop at the far end of the lot. It was the kind of day when the heat of summer lingered on the pavement but the promise of fall whispered in the breeze. The last few hours had been filled with non-stop filming, and the actress craved nothing more than a brief respite. A few minutes to herself, away from the press, the cameras, the constant spotlight. Before we get into the story, comment below where you are watching from today. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The moment her car stopped, the quiet was shattered by the roar of motorcycles pulling in. 3 of them, their engines loud, rumbling as they circled the lot before parking near the pumps. Sandra looked over her shoulder, her relaxed demeanor quickly shifting. The men wore the telltale marks of a biker gang, worn leather jackets with patches, their beards and tattoos proclaiming they lived by a code foreign to her world. She didn't think much of it at first. After all, in her line of work, the unexpected was a daily occurrence. She moved to step out of the car, but the first man, a burly figure with a thick neck and a glare that could pierce metal, spotted her. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Sandra thought she imagined the tension in the air. But then the biker pointed directly at her, his voice raised in mock disbelief. "Is that Sandra Bullock?" He called out, loud enough for the others to hear. Sandra froze. The recognition hit her in an instant. She could see the look in his eyes, not admiration, but contempt. She smiled politely, prepared for the usual pleasantries, but the biker's tone quickly turned venomous. "Figures," he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. Another Hollywood princess, driving around in her shiny car, flaunting her wealth while we're out here, working our asses off just to survive. Sandra felt her heart rate spike, but she kept her composure. It wasn't the first time someone had criticized her or other celebrities for their privilege, but something about this moment felt different. The way the biker's words felt like they were laced with years of frustration, real, burning resentment. The biker took a step closer, his boots crunching against the gravel as he circled her car. "What's it like, huh? Playing the hero on screen while people like me are stuck in the trenches?" His voice was rising now, his hands gesturing wildly, as if the very existence of her car was an affront to him. "You think you know what it's like to struggle? To get your hands dirty? Get real, lady. You're just another fake, pretending to understand." Sandra stayed in the car, gripping the wheel, her fingers tight around the leather. She could feel the anger rising in him, and it was clear that the more he looked at her, the more it twisted into something darker. His friends, the other bikers, joined in, laughing cruelly, egging him on. "Yeah, tell her. Hollywood's full of hypocrites, aren't they?" Another biker, smaller but just as angry, shouted, "Flaunting their wealth while they act like they're saving the world." He kicked at a nearby gas pump as if it were her fault. Sandra's lips parted, but the words didn't come immediately. What could she say? This wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush, and as the anger built in the group, she realized something. There was no reasoning with them. They weren't asking for understanding. They wanted to be heard, to make their rage known. The first biker, Hawk, turned back to her car, his eyes glaring at the polished metal. He reached into the nearby gas station rack, grabbing a bottle of water. With a malicious smirk, he chucked it toward her car. It hit the side with a dull thud, splashing the contents across the door. Sandra flinched at the impact but didn't flinch away. "Don't like it when people point out the truth, do you? All that wealth and not a clue about what real life is like for the people who pay your bills," Hawk yelled. Sandra sat still. She wasn't used to this kind of confrontation. Sure, she dealt with paparazzi and critics, but this felt different. More personal. She stared out at them, her mind racing. Should she drive off? Get out and confront them? But before she could make a decision, Hawk threw another item. A magazine this time, aiming it with precision at the side mirror of her car. It made a loud crash as it bounced off, sending papers fluttering to the ground. Maybe you should take your designer car and head back to your mansion, where you don't have to face the reality of the world we live in, Hawk continued, his voice seething with anger. For a brief moment, Sandra considered leaving. She could drive away, escape to her quiet life, but she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about something bigger, about the divide between people like her, celebrities, and those who felt left behind. But as Hawk's tirade continued, something in her snapped. She couldn't let him think for a second that this kind of behavior was acceptable. But before she could react, another voice pierced the air, cutting through the tension. You think bullying a woman makes you look tough? The voice was calm, steady, and out of place in the chaos. Sandra looked up, surprised to see a man approaching them from across the parking lot. The sun was fading, and the light cast long shadows, but she could clearly make out the tall, confident figure of Denzel Washington. His gait was unhurried as he strode toward the group, a look of quiet determination in his eyes. The bikers stopped mid-sentence, caught off guard by his sudden presence. Sandra's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him immediately. Denzel Washington? Hawk muttered, sizing him up. Without missing a beat, Denzel stepped forward, pulling out his phone, and began recording the bikers. You want to make a point about class and privilege? Denzel said, his voice cutting through the noise. Then let's make it clear. Right here, right now. The bikers stood frozen, the anger in their eyes flickering between confusion and the dawning realization that they were no longer in control of the situation. Sandra felt a strange sense of relief, like a lifeline had just been thrown into a stormy sea. Denzel didn't flinch as he kept the camera trained on the bikers. His voice was low, but it carried with the force of someone who knew how to stand his ground. Apologize, he said simply. Right here, right now, on camera, or this gets uploaded, and everyone will know what kind of people you are. For a moment, the tension hung thick in the air. Hawk's face reddened, his pride bruised, and the other bikers looked at each other, unsure of how to react. It was the kind of standoff where everything seemed to pause, frozen in time, until Denzel finally spoke again, his words coming like an unshakable command. Make it right, or let the world see you for who you really are. The parking lot felt like a stage, the lights of the nearby gas pumps casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Sandra sat still in her car, her eyes locked on Denzel, still processing his sudden appearance. The bikers were no longer taunting her. Their attention was now focused on him, and for the first time since they had arrived, they seemed unsure of themselves. The air was thick with tension, the kind of stifling silence that precedes something big. Denzel's posture was calm, almost casual. His eyes, however, told a different story. There was a fire in them, a determination that wasn't born from anger but from something deeper, something righteous. He held his phone with a steady hand, the camera trained on Hawk and his crew, as if he were an observer of a play rather than a participant in it. His movements were deliberate, measured. Every second that passed, the situation hung in the balance, and he was silently letting the weight of the moment sink in. For the bikers, the situation had gone from one of unchecked aggression to a standoff they were no longer prepared for. They had underestimated Denzel, thinking they could intimidate Sandra, but now their own bravado was crumbling in the face of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. Hawk's eyes flickered between Denzel and the phone in his hand. His pride was wounded, his voice faltering for the first time since the confrontation began. Who the hell do you think you are, buddy? Hawk's voice came out gruff, but there was a quiver in it now. The cocky confidence was gone, replaced by a creeping doubt. The biker crew was falling apart, their earlier unity dissolving in the face of Denzel's quiet but undeniable presence. Denzel didn't respond to the question. He simply kept recording, his focus never wavering. The sound of the wind was the only thing breaking the silence now, rustling through the trees in the distance, mingling with the faint hum of the highway. Sandra watched, her heart pounding, but not from fear anymore. She was watching someone else take control of the situation. A person who had no need to argue, who didn't need to scream to be heard. "Why don't you put the camera down, man? This isn't about you," Sledge sneered, his fingers twitching toward the worn leather of his jacket, his stance defensive. His glare was cold, but there was something in it now, something like uncertainty. Denzel looked at Sledge for the first time, his eyes steady but unfazed. "This is exactly about me," he said. "Because every time someone like you thinks they can intimidate a woman just because she's sitting in her car, thinking she's an easy target, it becomes about me. It becomes about all of us. And it becomes something worth standing up for." Sandra felt her breath catch in her throat. The bikers had stopped shouting, stopped pushing. But Denzel's calm words had not only turned the tables. They had painted a picture of this moment that was impossible to ignore. There was no escaping the fact that the bikers had been caught in their own ugliness, their insecurities parading themselves for the world to see. She hadn't expected anyone to step in like this, least of all someone as dignified as Denzel Washington. But now that he had, she realized that this wasn't just about protecting her. It was about something much larger, something they were all a part of. Hawk sneered again, trying to regain some semblance of his former bravado. "You think this is going to change anything? You think this camera is going to make the world care about some stuck-up celebrity getting a little taste of what it's like for the rest of us?" Denzel didn't flinch. "No," he said quietly. "But I think it'll show people like you for what you are." Sandra could feel the weight of Denzel's words settle in the air, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to defend herself. The bikers had become the spectacle now, their aggression a mirror to their own frustration, their own unwillingness to face the complexities of the world around them. Their resentment had been placed on full display, and there was no hiding behind it anymore. The phone's camera continued to record, a silent witness to the scene unfolding. Hawk and his crew seemed to shrink beneath Denzel's unwavering gaze. Sledge shifted uneasily on his feet, glancing at the others, who were now looking anywhere but at Sandra or Denzel. The group was falling apart, and Hawk knew it. It wasn't the first time he had tried to control a crowd with anger and force, but this time was different. The presence of someone who refused to back down made all the difference. Sandra shifted in her seat, her mind spinning. She had been on the receiving end of public scrutiny for years, but this felt different. Normally, it was the press or the critics who came after her. They used words and images to tear down. But this was something else entirely. The raw aggression of these bikers, directed at her with nothing but hatred, was enough to break anyone. Yet, as she watched Denzel stand there, unaffected by their taunts, something inside her stirred. He wasn't just defending her. He was challenging the idea that people like her could ever be seen as vulnerable or worse, less worthy of respect because of her position in society. She had always known her place in the world. As an actress, she had the privilege of fame and wealth, but it was a double-edged sword. There was always someone ready to tear it down, to accuse her of being out of touch, of being something less than human because of her success. But in this moment, she realized the power wasn't in the car she drove or the fame she carried with her. It was in how she held herself when it mattered. And Denzel wasn't just teaching her that lesson. He was showing everyone who had ever judged her from a distance that there was more to the story. The bikers were starting to crumble. They no longer looked like the powerful group they once had been. Their bravado had been replaced by uncertainty, and Sandra could see it in their eyes. Hawk was still holding onto his pride, but it was a fading ember, ready to be extinguished. The longer he stood there, the more he looked like a man on the verge of realizing his own foolishness. Denzel stepped forward again, and the shift in the air was palpable. Sandra felt it deep in her chest. This was no longer a confrontation, it was a turning point. "You're done here," Denzel said, his voice cutting through the night air like a sharp blade. "You apologize now, or you walk away with nothing but your shame." For a moment, everything was still. No one moved. No one spoke. The tension that had once been so thick in the air now felt like it was lifting. as if the truth had suddenly found a way to slip into the cracks of the moment. And then Hawk's face, red and contorted with anger, fell. His shoulders slumped, the fight drained out of him, and he looked at his gang. His brothers, each of them shifting uncomfortably, unwilling to support him any longer. "You're right," Hawk muttered, his voice thick with defeat. "We're done." The air around them seemed to exhale as Hawk turned, walking back toward his motorcycle with his crew following behind, leaving behind the bitterness and shame of their failed attempt to intimidate a woman. Denzel's camera was still rolling, capturing every moment of it. Sandra watched the bikers leave, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. But it was more than just relief. It was the understanding that, in the most unexpected moments, there were people who were willing to stand up for what was right. People who would challenge the narratives of aggression and power. And in that quiet, tension-filled parking lot, Sandra Bullock found her own quiet moment of victory. The night had settled in fully now, the pale moonlight casting long shadows across the gas station parking lot. The hum of the highway seemed distant, like the world beyond this isolated moment had become muffled, almost irrelevant. Sandra remained in her car, her hands still gripping the steering wheel, her mind racing. It had all happened so fast, too fast for her to fully grasp. She had been targeted, attacked, reduced to an object of ridicule by a group of strangers, all because of something they assumed about her. And then, just as quickly, a stranger had stepped into the chaos, quiet but commanding, dismantling the entire situation with a calm authority that left her in awe. But even as the bikers backed down, their angry energy dissipating into the night, the tension between them and Denzel remained palpable. Sandra watched the scene unfold through the rearview mirror, her eyes darting between the retreating figures of the bikers and the stillness of Denzel's presence. He had yet to speak again, still holding his phone up, recording every moment of their retreat. Hawk and his crew didn't look back, their motorcycle engines starting up in the distance, but Sandra could feel something unspoken hanging in the air. The bikers were retreating, but they weren't done, and Denzel knew it. "Don't think for a second this is over," Hawk shouted from across the lot, his voice carrying through the night, low and angry. The bike's engine growled behind him, a sharp contrast to his frustrated tone. "You think you can just humiliate me in front of everyone, huh?" Denzel didn't flinch. He lowered his phone and took a slow step forward, his gaze unwavering. The world had slowed down, but Denzel remained a figure of quiet intensity, his demeanor unshaken. Sandra watched, her heart now thudding in her chest. This was no longer just about her. It wasn't just about the bikers or their misplaced anger toward her. It was about something deeper, something that felt as if it were unraveling right before her eyes. "You really want to make this worse?" Denzel's voice was a controlled whisper, but it carried through the air like the rumble of thunder. Hawk and his crew hesitated. There was a flash of defiance in Hawk's eyes, but it was fleeting. He wasn't sure if his next words would secure his authority or completely shatter it. "I don't need some Hollywood guy telling me how to live," Hawk spat, his tone bitter, resentful. "You think you can fix this by playing hero?" Denzel took another step, closing the distance between them. The air between them crackled with an unspoken tension that Sandra could feel deep in her chest. There was no aggression in Denzel's movements, no loud proclamations or threats, but his presence was overwhelming, more powerful than any anger Hawk could muster. "I'm not playing hero," Denzel said quietly, but with an authority that made Hawk flinch. "I'm showing you what it looks like when someone stands up to intimidation. You think this is about me and you, huh? It's not. It's about what happens when people like you think they can get away with bullying others. It's about accountability." Hawk's face twisted in frustration, his pride bruised. The bikers behind him remained silent, each of them now more aware of the situation than they had been moments ago. Their leader was faltering, their once solid unity beginning to crack under the pressure of Denzel's words. They had been the aggressors, but now, as the cameras and the eyes of the world seemed to settle on them, they were realizing that they weren't just being caught on tape. They were being exposed. "You're pathetic," Denzel continued, his tone cutting through the growing tension like a knife. You talk about class, about being hardworking, but you're the ones throwing a fit because a woman in a car made you feel small. That's not power. That's insecurity. For a moment, the entire parking lot was still. Hawk's grip tightened on the handlebars of his motorcycle, but there was no defiance left in him. He was no longer the intimidating figure he had been moments ago. He looked small now, even to his crew. The anger that had once driven him seemed to be slipping through his fingers, replaced by a quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, he had miscalculated. You really want to do this in front of everybody? Hawk finally muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, the sting of humiliation creeping into his words. Denzel didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, staring Hawk down, his posture relaxed but unwavering. There was no need to shout, no need to escalate. The tension in the air wasn't about volume or force. It was about standing your ground when everyone around you expected you to back down. Sandra could feel it now, the true weight of the moment. The quiet power that Denzel exuded was more potent than any shouts or physical confrontations. It wasn't about proving something. It was about demanding respect in the face of unwarranted aggression. Hawk's gaze flickered to the ground, his face flushed with anger and shame. The bikers were shifting, uncomfortable in the growing silence. None of them seemed eager to continue the standoff. Hawk finally let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping. He wasn't defeated, not in the traditional sense. But the victory Denzel had claimed was undeniable. It wasn't a victory over violence or chaos. It was a victory over the small-mindedness that so often fueled hostility. It was a victory over the need to prove something to others. You've got your apology, all right? Hawk said, his words forced, like a man conceding to a battle he never expected to lose. Now, are you happy? Denzel didn't immediately respond. Instead, he turned to Sandra, who was still sitting in the car, her eyes wide as she processed what had just transpired. The moment had been so intense, so quickly shifting, that she hadn't had a chance to fully absorb it all. Are you okay? Denzel's voice was soft now, not filled with anger but with genuine concern. Sandra nodded, her voice shaky but sincere. I think I am now. Denzel gave a small nod, then turned back to the bikers. Good. Now get on your bikes and go home, he said, his voice resolute but not cruel. He wasn't interested in making them feel small any longer. He had already won that battle. The bikers, one by one, mounted their motorcycles, still unsure of themselves, still reeling from the confrontation. They revved their engines, the roar breaking the silence that had lingered too long, and then, without another word, they left. As their bikes disappeared down the road, the air felt lighter, the weight of their aggression fading into the background. Denzel turned back to Sandra and offered a reassuring smile. You're free to go now. Sandra exhaled, the weight of the entire encounter lifting from her shoulders. She looked at Denzel, still processing the unexpected turn of events. There were no grand speeches, no applause. Just two people standing in a parking lot, having witnessed something powerful unfold without a single punch thrown. She smiled back, grateful for the quiet heroism that had just saved her. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and awe. Denzel's smile softened. You don't need to thank me, he said. Just remember, sometimes doing the right thing isn't about getting the recognition. It's about doing it when no one else will. Sandra nodded, understanding the weight of his words. And as Denzel walked back to his car, leaving her to reflect on the experience, she realized something important. This was more than just a moment of personal safety. This was a lesson about standing up for others, about fighting back against hate and hostility, no matter where it came from. The following morning, the world was a little different. What had started as a quiet altercation in a small, inconspicuous gas station parking lot had grown into something far bigger, far more consequential. As the morning sun rose, casting golden light across the horizon, the video that Denzel had taken the previous night began to spread like wildfire. Started small, one comment, one share, and then it took off. By the time most of the country awoke, the confrontation had already gone viral. Sandra sat in her hotel room, still processing the events of the previous night. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the entire scene over and over. The bikers' taunts, the aggression, Denzel's intervention. It all felt like a surreal blur. But now, as the video continued to gain traction online, the blur had shifted into something sharp, clear, and undeniably real. She couldn't hide from it anymore. Her phone buzzed repeatedly as notifications poured in. Social media was exploding. Headlines popped up on her screen. Hollywood actress bullied by bikers, until Denzel Washington steps in. Watch Denzel shut down harassment in powerful moment. And the real hero in this viral video? Denzel Washington. The comments were just as overwhelming. On one hand, there were thousands of people praising her composure, admiring how she had handled the situation with grace and dignity. On the other hand, there were those who accused her of being a privileged celebrity who didn't understand the struggles of ordinary people. Sandra couldn't help but shake her head. She wasn't sure what bothered her more, the praise or the criticism. On one hand, she appreciated the support, but on the other, she felt uncomfortable with the fact that she had become a symbol in a larger narrative that she hadn't asked for. She scrolled through the messages, her eyes briefly stopping on one comment that made her pause. Good for Denzel, but what about her? She didn't even stand up for herself. Why didn't she say something? It was a simple question, but it stung. It was true. She hadn't said much during the confrontation. She had remained silent, and in doing so, she had let Denzel carry the weight of the situation. Had she failed to stand up for herself? Was there something more she should have done? But before she could delve deeper into those thoughts, her phone rang again, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. It was a call from her publicist, Mia. Sandra hesitated for a moment, then answered. Sandra, we need to talk. Mia's voice came through, tense but controlled. You've seen the video, right? I have, Sandra replied, her voice quiet. Listen, the video is everywhere. It's blowing up in ways we didn't anticipate. We're getting a lot of press calls, a lot of interest from outlets all over. But there's one problem, Mia continued, her voice growing more urgent. The backlash isn't just on the bikers. It's starting to hit you. They're calling you another privileged celebrity. And the narrative is turning against you. People are asking why you didn't defend yourself, why you stayed silent. Some are even suggesting you should have left when it first started. Sandra clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around her phone. She had known this would happen. As soon as someone tried to label you, whether as a hero or a villain, they took control of the narrative. They spun the story in whatever direction they wanted, and the people involved were left to clean up the mess. I didn't know what to say, Sandra said softly, almost to herself. I didn't know what to do. Denzel. He took care of it. He did what needed to be done. He showed them what needed to be done. Mia was silent for a moment, clearly considering her words carefully. I get it, Sandra, but this is going to be a media storm. You have to be ready to address it head-on. The narrative is out there now, and we need to take control. If we don't respond, people will just keep speculating. Sandra sighed, her shoulders heavy with the weight of responsibility. She had always known that fame came with a price, but this was something different. This wasn't about playing a role on screen. This was real. This was her life, her reputation, and the world was watching. I'll be ready, Sandra said, her voice firm now, determination seeping in. But I need to make sure people understand what happened, that this wasn't just some random attack. This was about more than me. This was about people like Denzel, people who stepped up when others wouldn't. Mia agreed, and they quickly arranged a meeting with a media team to craft a statement. As the day wore on, Sandra's phone remained constantly buzzing with calls, messages, and more viral posts. The story was taking on a life of its own, and there was no escaping it. But in the back of her mind, something told her that this wasn't just about defending herself or Denzel. This was about challenging the narrative that had been thrust upon them. The public's perception of the situation was evolving rapidly. Those who had once cheered for Denzel's intervention now began to turn their gaze towards Sandra, scrutinizing her every move. The criticism was mounting, but so was the support. Social media was divided. Some hailed her as a symbol of grace under fire. Others criticized her silence in the face of aggression. In a strange way, she felt like she had become a test case for a larger societal issue, something bigger than the parking lot encounter that had started it all. Meanwhile, Denzel's role in the video was being heralded as a moment of quiet heroism. His calm demeanor, his unwavering stance against the bikers' harassment, resonated with millions. But the narrative surrounding his actions quickly shifted from admiration to a broader reflection on masculinity, power, and justice in modern society. People weren't just talking about what he had done, they were discussing why he had done it and why it had been so effective. Denzel's name was trending across social media, his face appearing on news outlets everywhere, his actions being praised as a reminder of the power of standing up for what's right. But Sandra couldn't escape the nagging question in her mind. Was she complicit in letting Denzel take the lead? Should she have said something when the bikers first confronted her? The criticism from some corners of the internet stung. But as the hours passed and the story continued to evolve, Sandra began to understand something important. This wasn't just about how she reacted in the moment. It wasn't even about how Denzel had acted. It was about the larger issue of respect. Respect for others regardless of their background, their wealth, or their status. What had happened that night wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger conversation about how we treat each other, how we allow our insecurities and frustrations to spill out in ways that harm others. Sandra had always prided herself on being real, on staying grounded despite her fame. But now, as the world watched, she realized that being real wasn't just about remaining humble in front of cameras. It was about standing firm in the face of adversity, whether or not the world was ready to understand. And in the days to come, she would have to find her voice in this new narrative, one that wasn't hers to create, but one she had the power to shape. The video had done its job. It had exposed the bikers' aggression, and it had shown Denzel's strength. Now, it was time for Sandra to find her place in the story, and for the world to see that the real heroism wasn't just about making a stand. It was about owning the consequences of the moment and finding the courage to speak up, even when the world was watching. The media storm had only intensified as the days passed. What had started as an isolated incident at a gas station had now become a national conversation. News outlets were dissecting every second of the footage, analyzing the way Denzel had stepped in, the way Sandra had remained silent, and the larger implications of the entire situation. The lines between heroism and complicity blurred, and the public had taken sides. Some viewing Denzel as the clear hero, others questioning Sandra's passivity. But as the headlines grew, so did the pressure. Sandra sat alone in a quiet cafe, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. She had just finished a long string of phone calls with her publicist and legal team. The discussions were draining, the weight of the scrutiny pressing down on her like a physical force. She had spent the past few days avoiding the media, unsure of how to approach the growing controversy. The situation was rapidly evolving, and every word she said seemed to be dissected and twisted. Yet, in the midst of all the chaos, Denzel reached out. His message was simple: "I think we should talk." Sandra hadn't hesitated. She knew that he was the one person who could help her make sense of everything. He had been the calm in the storm, the steady hand guiding the narrative, while she had been left to pick up the pieces of a situation she didn't quite understand. When Denzel arrived at the cafe, it was clear he had been reflecting on the events as much as she had. His expression was calm, but there was a deepness in his eyes that suggested he, too, had been struggling with the weight of the situation. As he took a seat across from her, there was no need for pleasantries. They both knew what was at stake now. "Everything okay?" Denzel asked, his voice gentle, but there was an unmistakable concern behind it. Sandra could see it in his eyes, the empathy, the understanding. Sandra exhaled slowly, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "It's like the world has turned upside down. One minute, I'm trying to get through my day, and the next, I'm caught in the middle of this circus." And people are asking questions I don't even have answers to. Denzel nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. He wasn't judging her. He was listening. It's strange, Sandra continued, because the video was supposed to be about you. It was supposed to be about how you stepped in and made things right. But now, I'm the one getting questioned, as if I did something wrong. People want to know why I didn't stand up for myself. Denzel leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. People always want answers. They want a story, a narrative they can easily digest. But the truth is, there's no simple answer to what happened. You didn't stand up for yourself, and that's okay. That's human. But here's the thing, you don't owe anyone an explanation for your actions. You don't owe the world a performance. Sandra let out a soft laugh, though it lacked any real humor. You know, I've been in the public eye for so long, but I've never felt like I was under a microscope like this. It's like people expect me to be perfect all the time. They forget that I'm just a person, like anyone else. And I don't always have the answers. I don't always know what to do. Denzel nodded, his gaze unwavering. That's the problem with fame, he said. People forget that celebrities are people. They think they can demand perfection, that they can tell you who you should be. But the truth is, we're all just trying to figure it out one step at a time. What happened that night wasn't just about you. It was about the whole situation, about how the world reacts when someone steps out of line, when they're different, when they don't conform to what's expected. Sandra looked at him, her gaze softening. You make it sound so simple, she said. But it feels so complicated. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know if I should just leave or stand up and fight back. I just froze. It's not about knowing how to react in the moment, Denzel said, his voice steady. It's about trusting yourself. And sometimes, trusting yourself means letting someone else step in when you need help. There's no shame in that. Not everything needs to be solved by one person. Sometimes it takes a group to make things right. Sandra considered his words, letting them sink in. There was something undeniably calming about the way Denzel spoke, about the way he carried himself. He had a way of making the most complicated situations seem manageable, as if the weight of the world wasn't something you had to carry alone. I didn't even think about how this would affect you, Sandra admitted, her voice quieter now. You stepped in, you did the right thing, but now you're getting the credit, and I'm just the woman in the car. Denzel shook his head, his expression gentle but firm. It wasn't about me either. It was about doing what was right, showing the world that sometimes the right thing to do is the quietest thing. You don't need to defend yourself. What you did, what we both did, isn't about seeking praise. It's about making sure people understand that it's not okay to bully others, regardless of who they are or what they've done. It's about standing up for what's right. Sandra swallowed hard, the weight of his words hitting her. She had spent so much time over the past few days questioning herself, wondering if she had done enough, if she had been strong enough. But sitting here with Denzel, hearing his perspective, she felt something inside her shift. She wasn't alone in this. She didn't have to carry this burden by herself. And more importantly, she didn't have to be perfect. What happens now? Sandra asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. What do we do now? This video is everywhere. People are watching us, waiting for us to say something. But I don't even know what to say. Denzel smiled, a small, reassuring gesture. You speak your truth, he said simply. That's all you need to do. You don't have to fix everything. You just need to be honest. People will respect that. Sandra nodded, taking in his words. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The pressure that had built up over the past few days seemed to lift, just a little. There was still a long road ahead, but she didn't have to walk it alone. Denzel had reminded her of that, and it gave her the strength to stand up and face the world, no matter what came next. Thank you, Denzel, Sandra said, her voice full of gratitude. For everything. He gave her a nod, his smile widening slightly. No thanks needed. We're all just trying to make it through this thing together.